just a little bit more of a background on that. I did have a manic episode and subsequent. I have a mental illness that I live with that I had to kind of overcome in the last 3 years, and living with that has kind of influenced a lot of the way that I see the world and interact with the world, and working with that within the industry and out of the industry has affected a lot of my views on things, and also the kind of how important I see mental health. And I think that is it.
I think you nailed it.
Nice.
She makes some dope prayer candles.
Like, if you have anybody you want, I don't know, from Beyonce to Harambe. So, I got it.
Oh, amazing. I'll take Harambe.
Weirdly, that was like I sold enough Harambe candles like 2 years ago at Christmas to afford me to be able to move to New Orleans. So let's have Harambe.
My turn?
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Sabrina Kudic. I have been in the industry now for about 6 years, and during that time, the last year and a half, I celebrated sobriety. So my kind of play with my mental health, and also recognizing that my symptoms of alcoholism were definitely connected to it, and trying to figure out a way in which I can bridge my disease as well as with my career path of choice. I kind of came into the industry with absolute love and adoration. My first cocktail I ever made was a Cosmopolitan. I was 13 years old, and I had this like little, no, it's crazy, I had this little shaker, and it was this little orange Cointreau shaker. But what I really loved about it itself was that after I would make the cocktails, because they were all like measured out, I would go to my family and be like, did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Can I make you another? And it wasn't so much about me as it was the guest experience. And somewhere along the way with my disease and alcoholism, I lost that, and I lost touch with myself. And this past year has been about finding me again. Last year was about my recovery. This year has been about getting my mind right. And that was something that was hard for me to do. And I'm going to share more about that as our panel continues and the slides go on. But currently now I'm in the process of applying to schools and hopefully be accepted into the Hunter Silverman School of Social Work. So I want to continue my education in mental health, and I want to continue spreading the joys of what we do, along with how we can align ourselves mentally and physically, and really just have fun.
Holy fuck, I'm so proud of you.
I actually just applied for my non-graduate, so my non-degree graduate course, so I'm working towards it. So that's where I'm at right now, and it's been a process. School, I've had a lot of trauma with college, so kind of coming into the realization that no, this is a path that I definitely want to take, and there's a necessity and there's also a need of being of service to you all, as well as to myself. So I'm here as an advocate, I'm here from personal experience, and I'm just here to share my hope with you all. So,
hell yeah.
Now I have to follow that.
No.
My name's Kristina Magro. I'm from Chicago. I am a general manager of Lone Wolf Tavern, but I'm also a co-founder with a group of other people of support staff, Moni Bunny, Laura Kelton, DJ Dodd, and Matt Cole. We started support staff, which is a mental health non-for-profit, a bridge of Hope for the Day. So that's the resource stickers that you have in front of you. We are Chicago-based, but ideally, once we get our feet underneath us, we'll create a platform that could be utilized in multiple cities and countries, hopefully, in the future. But what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between mental health professionals and the food and beverage industry. Since we are just bartenders and cooks, we aren't mental health professionals, nor do we try to act like them. We're just here to get people connected with the right people, because I feel like Chicago specifically has gone through a lot of trauma in the past couple years. So support staff for me kind of came out of frustration, not only with the industry, but with kind of the reactive nature that we deal with mental health, and like, especially like Anthony Bourdain's a good topic. Like somebody big passes away and we all clap back on social media, and then like, we need to do something about this, and we talk about it for like a week and then it kind of goes away. So what we're, I think, all trying to do collectively is break down the stigma of mental health and just make it more common to talk about.
And actively providing and creating resources.
Yeah. Real resources
to address, address the issues in a very foundational way. Cool. Oh man, I'm so excited. This is great. All right, cool. So format-wise of this seminar, I'm going to take you through. I guess it is a little lecture-y. Sorry. But I kind of want to make sure that there's some psychoeducation involved in what we're doing to understand, like, what is it truly that we're talking about? What is mental health, and what are some factors that influence mental health for individuals in life, but also specifically to this industry? What makes this industry so unique and challenging at the same time, right? So what is mental health? World Health Organization defines mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stressors of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. That's mental health. So, what mental health? Also, I want just you to take note of the holistic definition of what that is. So it talks about work life, it talks about your place in the community, coping with the normal stresses of life. Yeah, get those photos before. What mental health is not is the absence of mental illness. That is that is not what mental health is. Mental health is not being happy all the time. We have a very solid range of emotions within our emotional capability, and they all serve a solid purpose. So a pursuit of happiness, which is, thrown around a lot, we can pursue that, but that can't always be the end goal, because then we're robbing ourselves of like a lot of other feelings as well. Limited to when issues arise, right? So I think you mentioned that just a moment ago, of like, you lose someone like Anthony Bourdain and suddenly mental health is at the forefront of most people's conversations and stuff, but having conversations about mental health is always, mental health is constant, mental health is everything, right? Mental health is not the most critical mental health issues. So when we talk about mental health, we can certainly talk about certain diseases, right? We can talk about, bipolar, we can talk about schizophrenia, we can talk about whatever, but mental health is not limited to just those things. And I think that's a common misconception that we all fall into when we talk about someone's mental health or mental illness. It's we're lacking the pieces of conversations that how mental health is absolutely everything, and not just big, severe, overt issues. And it's not simple, right? So it's quite a complex thing. So what impacts our mental health? Literally everything. Like everything. Most of what we take in as individuals are rooted in perception. Like we were talking about burnout this morning. It's all really rooted in perception, how we are moving through the world and what we're perceiving as we take certain images or experiences in. So I broke it down to 4 pieces. You have social, interpersonal, biological, and experiential. Social are your larger social issues, like being part of a marginalized community, let's say. That is something that impacts your mental health. What happens in the government, that is something, like large, broad issues that you can't necessarily touch or control, that are like still deterministically affecting you, right? interpersonal, those are our day-to-day interactions with friends and family and other people. These, those interactions and the roles that we play within our relationships with each other will definitely affect our mental health in a big way. There's biological factors. You know, we talk about bipolar, for example. Those are biological factors that, like, in your brain and body, that is something that is affecting the way that you're moving through the world, right? And then experiential factors, like if you get divorced, right? Something happens to you, you're attacked, right? So those are experiential factors that are gonna affect your mental health. So identifying these a little bit more: race, gender identity, socioeconomic status, physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, political, climate, social narratives, and marginalization. Power dynamics within interpersonal interactions are a big thing that I think in this industry is something to really consider. Like, and truly when we talk about mental health, it is essential to understand that when we talk about stuff like harassment, that is also a conversation about mental health. When we talk about substance use issues, that is a conversation about mental health. When we talk about diversity issues, right? Racism, classism, marginalization based on your citizenship status. These are all mental health issues. And on the flip side of that, you can't really have a conversation about mental health unless it's intersectional. Like, understanding these broader social issues is absolutely essential to having a real functional conversation about mental health, because they have to be considered, because they're affecting the way that someone's moving through the world. Does that make sense? Are you all with me? Feeling good? Cool. Role adherence. So, microaggressions. So these day-to-day interactions, and the role adherence is a really interesting one. We can look at family and relationships, of like, if you think about your family structure for a second, right? Like, and maybe you have siblings. Your parents and family and everyone around you might be like, well, your brother is this, and you are this, and you kind of grew up being defined by those pieces, right? That's going to impact your mental health. And the way that you continue to subscribe to those roles is also going to impact the decision-making processes that you're utilizing throughout your life. So that affects your mental health in a big way. Also, like, in your really close relationships, like with your significant other, and the roles that you subscribe to in that, and the way that you might play within those, is definitely going to affect your mental health. And then in-group and out-group pieces. This is one which is really interesting to talk about in the context of our industry. Like, something that I hear get thrown around quite a lot is like, I'm not part of the cool kids club in the industry. But what's crazy is that I hear like nearly everybody say that. So then I'm like, who is the cool kid? Like, I don't know. It's FOMO. So the in-group, out-group is the group that you're a part of, and then also the groups that you might perceive to be ostracized from, and those interpersonal dynamics and how those work. Biological. So neurological chemical responses. What happens up in your dome, right? Is that's the clinical term. Okay, just making sure.
The dome.
All up in your dome.
Right,
And then
dome.
also brain health and injury. Traumatic brain injuries change people's personalities. Medication that you might be on changes people's personalities. Like in the DSM-5, there are actually specific diagnoses around like personality change based on a traumatic brain injury. So that stuff's going to impact your mental health too. And then experiential pieces like trauma, grief and loss, so like losing a parent, I use the reference of a divorce, and then extreme stress, which, who knows about that? Extreme levels of stress.
That's fine.
But these are things that are happening to you, right? Cool. Let's talk about stress, baby. Look at this little brain though.
I didn't move the last
I love this little brain. So stress, what is it? Stress arises when individuals perceive that they cannot adequately cope with the demands being made on them, or with demands being made on them, or with threats to their well-being. Solid piece of stress. And if a few of you were in the burnout seminar this morning, but we talked a lot about the perception of stress. That what might be especially stressful to me isn't stressful to Stephanie for a variety of reasons. Like experiential pieces certainly, but also like she may have developed coping skills that I don't have yet, right? Cool. But not all stress is bad. You know, stress is also a source of growth for us. Stress tells us where we need to grow and if we need to grow. So being stressed and experiencing stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's more about how do you react to it and how do you cope with it. So a little bit more about that. Stress can promote growth. Stress can build resilience, right? If you adequately cope with your stress, you become more resilient to the stressors that are presenting themselves to you. Managing stressful situations helps prepare you for future stressors. You know, so like you might go through something that like really sucks in your life and you're like, wow, I'm like really struggling, this is hard. But then when you're confronted with something down the line, it becomes a bit of a cakewalk because you've already built the skills within yourself to cope with it, to deal with it. So you can really only grow though when the individual can cope with stress in a healthy and effective way. Stress becomes a problem when it isn't adequately addressed, and this level of stress is known as chronic stress. So you have some options. So coping skills. You may not be able to control all of what you can experience, but you can control how you react to it, right? So these things that are happening to you, you can't, like you have a problematic guest interaction, right? You can't control what that person is going to say, right? You can maybe steer the conversation, you can do what you can. Your locus of control is how you react, and you have choices. Like I was out riding my bike, and there's another cyclist, and this car cut us off. And yes, it could have resulted in one of us dying. Like, you know, it was a high stress situation for sure, but then the car rode off. But the woman on the bike next to me is like screaming, and like I can see her veins happening, and like the car was gone and she was still so angry. And I was like, yo, you have a choice here. Like you could like not, like, you know, like, but what I saw is that she had a high level of stress, and she was definitely, you know, ticked off in that moment, and she didn't have a healthy way to cope with the stress of the situation, so it was coming out in really aggressive anger. I know we work with folks like that. You know, what? You know, people not really being able to manage their stress, and it comes out in an emotional expression. So your brain and body are constantly seeking ways to cope with stress. Has anyone seen Chernobyl?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know that scene when he's in the courtroom and he's like, so this system is here to mitigate this system, and this system failed. That's kind of what is happening constantly in you, in your body, and in your cognitive processes. Some of these coping skills that you have are automatic and subconscious, so you don't really know that they're happening, but others you are aware of. In order to develop healthy coping mechanisms, it requires a little bit of emotional intelligence, right? To be able to say, I see what's happening, I see that this is a pattern of how I'm coping, I can either accept that or I can change that. So within coping, you have 3 choices. You can confront the stressor in order to grow, you can numb the emotional response and not grow, or you just repress it, which also results in not growing. So confront the stressor in order to grow. You have a really busy, hectic shift, right? Things are like a little bonkers behind the bar. You can get through that by repressing it and just like put your head down in the service well and just like crush it out, right? And repress that, but then also come back to it and still like address it and be like, okay, so what went wrong there? how was I responding emotionally? Is there something that I can do in terms of mise en place to make things better? Like, right? And so then you're also actively developing organizational systems that'll help you, but also developing emotional systems that'll help you. But the numbing the response is the one that I think is most prevalent, like when you're getting absolutely crushed behind the bar, right? And then you take a shot with your colleagues. That's a numbing response. So you're actively numbing the stress, but you're also not confronting anything. So that coping mechanism is one in particular that is quite prevalent within our industry, and our culture and habits as well. Okay. So when we talk about coping mechanisms, there are healthy ways. No matter what, you're always going to be coping. There are always coping mechanisms. Like I said, some of them are automatic. Others are a little bit more intentional. I don't care what your coping mechanism is. It's not a judgment, right? It's more of what works for you in a healthy way that can lead to that emotional and stress growth, if you will, right? So like I use the example a lot when I talk about coping mechanisms of, I talk with my clinical cohorts, the folks that I went to graduate school with, that will connect ever so often, especially as I'm doing this kind of work. It's important that I connect with them because there's a responsibility there and an accountability piece too. But we often talk about what we are doing to take care of ourselves within the context of our work. A lot of my colleagues, they have a glass of wine at the end of the night, and that's their coping mechanism. That is their self-care. That's cool. That's something that works for them. That absolutely cannot be mine. That can't be my go-to because I work in booze, and that's already a very complicated relationship there. So what is a healthy coping mechanism for one person might not be a healthy coping mechanism for another person. Exercise is another example of that. Exercise is obviously something that's super, super important to our health and our mental health and our bodies and everything, but that obsessive, excessive exercise is when it starts to get a little like, it starts to become problematic. So yeah, does that make sense? How y'all doing? Feeling good?
Mm-hmm.
Dope. So I brought in another more in-depth, with all of that being said, like now that you've taken all of that in, I really like the World Health Organization's definition, but I like this one even more. So mental health is a dynamic state of internal equilibrium. So that's your Chernobyl piece, right? Which enables individuals to use their abilities in harmony with universal values of society. I like that piece so much because it acknowledges that mental health is all contextual as well, right? So there are some clinicians and psychologists out there that say like issues like schizophrenia, for example, it's not a mental illness. If everyone was schizophrenic, they would be just fine, but it's more in the context of what's acceptable within how we've deemed our society best be, right? My brother is ADHD, and he's like, he sees it now not as an illness, but as a gift of he has a different set of skills, like whereas everybody uses a cleaver, he uses a paring knife. That's kind of how he sees it. So I like that this definition really acknowledges that. Basic cognitive and social skills, ability to recognize, express, and modulate one's own emotions, as well as empathize with others. So the ability to connect, right? To control your emotions, but also to connect emotionally with other people. Flexibility and ability to cope with adverse life events and function in social roles. So like, can you cope with what like life stressors that are coming your way, right? A harmonious relationship between body and mind. Represent important components of mental health which contribute to various degrees to the state of that internal equilibrium. It's like my favorite definition. Like I'm so into it. Is this helpful to understand like the holistic nature of when we talk about mental health, what that is? Cool. Do I have any questions so far? I'm throwing a lot at you, so I just want to make sure that you're like, cool. Dope.
Put the screen on where all of that is highlighted, because with that blue screen it's very hard to take pictures of.
Ooh, that?
Yeah.
Yeah, take a picture of you.
Can I ask, is there a lot of debate on
Yes.
mental health definitions?
1000%.
And so, like, where are we at right now? Is this like the generally, or is this like just our favorite for us?
It's my favorite for us.
Okay.
You know, and it's you know, when I was in graduate school, I also did a graduate certificate in women and gender studies, right? The amount of debate of what feminism is and what it means, and the different theoretical pieces of that is absolutely intense. It's really, really something. But it's the same thing within mental health. Like, I've even gotten into screaming matches, surprise, with other clinicians based on our theoretical orientation of how we believe people grow and thrive. So yeah, there is constant debate. I mean, but also within an academic community, that's how we grow and that's how we move forward. It's those screaming matches that really, like, maybe it's not, well, whatever. Anyway.
Do you when you talked about the glass of wine that your coworkers used to wind down, do you still have a glass of wine, but it's not the purpose of?
I mean, I still drink.
No, I mean, that's part of it, but also it's not your coping mechanism. That's just...
It can't. The reason that like a glass of wine for me personally cannot be a coping mechanism is because based on our relationship within this industry and my relationship with booze, one glass to specifically cope might lead to 6 glasses to cope, right? I mean, we do have a superhuman mentality about ourselves that for some reason, since we serve it and talk about it, we're immune to its effects. Like, but my liver is still a liver. But I also know that for me, if that is my coping mechanism as opposed to a source of enjoyment or education, then that becomes really challenging for me, which means I have to find another coping mechanism. That's something I should say too. Does that make sense first? Cool. You cannot be void of coping mechanisms. They're just either unhealthy, ineffective, or effective and healthy, right? So if you remove a coping mechanism from your life, like say drinking, you need to replace it with something else. Otherwise, that's when, you know, issues like relapse happen. Like if you're, for example, like going into a world of sobriety, and if that's something you're exploring, I will also say with sobriety, if you are considering going sober, please do it under the supervision of a professional, because if you just quit drinking, like, and you've been drinking a lot, there's potential for heart attacks, there's potential for seizures, delirium tremens. It is like, I know that there's a lot of sober folks out there and it works for a lot of people, but please be mindful of how you're doing it and the health and care of it. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I know personally for myself, coming into sobriety in the industry, I didn't have any idea as to me even having a problem with alcohol. I had always been surrounded by booze. I have a definite passion and love for the industry that, you know, it ingrained in myself, and I thought that, yeah, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do. And what I've discovered personally for myself is that life will surprise you. No, and like in the most, I don't even know how to say it way, like my coming to the realization in my sobriety was that my doctor had to sit me down, and this was after knowing that he was gonna ask that fatal question, how many drinks of alcohol do you have a week? And my entire life since I had been going to the doctor, I have lied. And for the first time, I was so scared of my diagnosis that day when I went in on January 14th, that I was going to die if I did not change my lifestyle. My kidneys were petrified, essentially. And I was told that I needed to change. And I was like, fine, I'll change. I'll stop drinking. And I did, but it wasn't enough. It was only the fear that made me stop. It was never the digging. It was never the coming to the realization of like, oh, I'm obsessed with alcohol. It was on my mind. The month and a half before I realized I had a problem was tremors. Oh my God, I was shaking, I was sweating, I was still working behind a bar. And I was at Broken Shaker in Chicago. And I didn't tell anyone what I was going through. I just kind of told them that I was sick and that this was something I was going to do for a time being, and I had tried being sober in November, and I, didn't last. I relapsed in December. And that when the doctor told me, like, hey, you need to stop, I was like, okay, I'll stop. But then something happened. It triggered a feeling, a thought triggered a feeling, a memory, and it just like spiraled down to the core of my being that was just dying to have a drink. And I remember after like 2 months of just doing it cold turkey, I finally like realized I couldn't do it alone. And thank God I opened up to the bartender that I was working with at the time at Shaker, and I told her, hey, I know the doctor told me like I shouldn't drink because like I might die, but I really want to drink right now, and I like that's all I know is like this feeling, this broken-hearted feeling that I had, this pit in my stomach. The only thing that I could connect it to was my using of alcohol, and that I had actually been doing that my entire life, and I didn't realize it. So that moment, that bottom, was what it was for me, was emotional to the point where it was like, oh, the doctor was right, I do need to change, because that was really the crucial, pivotal point. And then kind of going into recovery after helped me realize, but as someone who did it on my own for the first 3 months, I always go with the recommendations of going to a doctor, an outpatient, any rehabilitation centers that are available. There are so many. They are lovely. I have been to many, and I have spoken out with so many people that are supportive, and it's there. It's a challenge, but it's a beautiful life, because that's what I was given, was my life back. And it's hard to discuss, especially I know in the industry where it's like, well, you're handling booze. Even in sobriety, I have people in the recovery rooms that are just like, what are you doing? Why? And I do it because I still love it, because I took away the alcohol and I found out I'm passionate about learning. I'm passionate about history. I'm passionate about people. I'm passionate about us and what we do as a community, and how impactful we are. The fact that people will, albeit the Yelp review sucks sometimes, but like that people will shout you out sometimes. They'll be like, yo, you gave the best service. And it's just like a part of me. It's like sharing a piece of myself, but also getting to know another individual and taking myself out of the equation. Because before it was always just like, how much are they going to spend? Are they going to buy me a drink? Am I going to drink? What are we drinking? Drink.
Like using alcohol as social currency.
Yeah, social way to just like interact with somebody. Oh, let me buy you a shot. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then it's like a 5-minute conversation.
It's an indication also, like, let me buy you a shot. That's an expression of love. Yeah. And there are other ways to love each other besides poisoning ourselves. Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think it's worth saying that, I mean, I'm not sober. I don't necessarily think sobriety is right for everyone. There is potential to be in between. I'm going to say this very carefully, but I'm still going to say it. I see a fetishizing of sobriety in our industry right now. A fetishizing. So just be mindful of that doesn't necessarily address the inherent issues that are actively happening within our industry, and moderation might be a better option for some people. But it's a very personal decision to make, and one that I would encourage you to make with a mental health professional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just, taking it, if you maintain yourself in the industry while still being sober, you do run the risk of being triggered and picking up, because it is easy. And something I really had to learn was how to disconnect the wire that had that connection in my mind. Like, where was I using my feelings as a method of, over binging? And like, personally for myself, I know I am an alcoholic. I know my story is different than everybody else's, but I am always ready and available for anyone who's interested in sobriety in general. It's just like questions and such like that, because it does look different. And I've gone to therapists that have definitely questioned, like, what are you still doing in there?
I have a lot of feelings about that.
I have feelings about it as well, but I don't express it. I understand that this is ultimately my life. And the more I open up about it, because in recovery it's recommended we don't even speak about our sobriety. So the fact that I'm here, and I recognize that emotion. It's okay. We don't speak about it because it runs the risk of us relapsing. And one of the things about alcoholism is that it's a disease that I will have for the rest of my life. And I also suffer from depression. So I don't know where in my life if I used alcohol to subsidize my depression, my manic depression. I don't know if what came first, the chicken or the egg, because that's also been a debate in recovery rooms as well. But all I know is that I can't pick up. I can't have one because there's no end. There's no stopping SAPs. I got coined SAP Squatch, which I'm very open and candid about my sobriety, and I want to make it so that you're not scared. And that these things like Sober July, Sober whatever, are fantastic. But it also kind of takes away the importance of what sober people are doing and how we're surviving in an industry that, overindulges and is a very flagrant, just let's drink and have fun. And it's we could definitely do that. Or you want to grab coffee and let's talk and get to know each other and really sit down and share values and share, what's going on in the world, because there's so much outside of our industry too that impacts us on the inside. I love reading the news so that I know if a guest comes in from wherever, I could be oh, did you hear about what's happening over there and this and that and third? And that's just my little way of getting out of my head. It's let me pick up as much knowledge that I can use with my guests and interchange. And it's helped alleviate a lot of my stresses behind the bar, as well as just navigating sobriety in general.
Yeah, because you've learned through removing alcohol from your life,
right.
from removing a very complicated relationship with alcohol, you were able to adequately address
Absolutely.
the other big pieces. So in terms of alcohol, substance abuse, it's from a diagnostic standpoint. So when as a clinician, when we diagnose, it's never just substance abuse. It's always substance use issues and something else, right? So the issue isn't necessarily the alcohol. The issue is using alcohol as a coping mechanism that gets out of control, right? So again, it's not really about vilifying the alcohol itself. And I mean, we're all at a drinks conference, so we we love it. I love it because I get to travel through time and space by consuming it, and that's extraordinary. And it tells me about culture and just so many things. But emphasizing those educational pieces and the beauty and craft of what it is that we do, rather than utilizing it as a coping mechanism, I think is a really solid step forward. I'll also share that when I was in graduate school, I was in my testing and appraisal class, so we were learning about instruments to measure different things through surveys and blah blah blah. So we had to take to experience what a client might experience when taking a survey. We had to take the simple screening instruments for substance abuse. And did I score high?
Yeah.
I scored high, but I was what the fuck? I don't have a problem, what is this? So I brought it to my professor, who's now my research partner, and I was yo, Phil, I just want to say there's a problem with this, because the question of did you have a drink with lunch? Of course I did. I'm industry. Did you, I work for a supplier, bro. Come on, but it's something that he and I will laugh about now, because I thought for some reason I was exempt. I was we need to develop another scale that's more culturally competent for the food and beverage industry. When, but it is. And it's interesting because he now has had other students. He's a professor at Virginia Commonwealth. He has other students who work in the industry, and he's they all say the same thing, Laura. He's I'll never forget you coming up that day, because now I have other students who work in the industry, and they all say the same thing, and that's fascinating to me. Again, we are not superhuman people, Substance abuse is substance abuse, right? Another thing. Oh wait, now it's gone from my head that I was going to bring up. Oh, you also don't have to be alcoholic to be abusing substances, right? And it coming back a little bit to like the diagnostic criteria of how we say that there is an active substance use issue, it's if it is negatively impacting your work life, your home life, your capability to grow and thrive. So it might be 2 drinks a night that's kind of breaking you down, or it could be 6. It doesn't matter. Like using a number to somehow quantify whether or not you have a problem. Another one is if you are drinking and blacking out super easily and it's disrupting your relationships, those are substance use issues, right? You can be dry for all of November, but then come December, unless you've actually addressed the issues that are inherently creating the drinking issues, then it's just gonna pop up again, you know? So just keep that in mind. So addressing mental health issues, how y'all doing?
Right.
It's a little heavy, it's a lot, but like hanging in there? Cool. How to address mental health issues from a social place, advocate. Do you wanna field this one?
Do you want me to talk about like how we did it? Okay. So we started support staff for me came out of a moment of extreme grief. I lost somebody very close to me, and I couldn't like get past this overwhelming feeling of guilt and responsibility, and like I should have seen it, but I didn't. And then I saw like people close to me just self-medicating and like drinking and not talking about it and kind of working themselves in the ground. And you know, we're all in this like room, but no one's talking about it. And I just felt like I was born and raised like very traditional Italian family where you do not like burden people with your problems. Like that's selfish of you, and so you don't really talk about mental health at all. So I was really struggling in this moment, but then I was also like, what the fuck? Because you see, I mean, no, like you see like so many people out there and they're like advocating for all of these things, or like you see, like this is a perfect example, you see all of these brands that are like just throwing so much money like into these like parties that will just disappear tomorrow. So I think what really put a fire up under our ass was there was a cocktail competition, of course, and it was about sustainability, and I just like could not get past the fact of like, yeah, like reusable lime juice is dope, and like reusing plastic, cool, but like let's talk about, sorry, that's important, like I don't want to,
No, I want keep going.
like sustainability is dope, but like we can't talk about sustainability until we talk about how we sustain ourselves as a community and as a culture, because because it's like I think we've made the point abundantly clear, we as hospitality individuals, we take better care of our guests and we do ourselves, and we like champion this like double hustle mentality. Like, how many people have you seen this week? And you're like, how are you? Like, what are you up to? And they're like, oh, I'm so busy. Like, I have like
I'm so
this and this. Like, I'm exhausted. Blah, blah. And we're like, good for you. Like, that's kind of fucked. So, we go to this competition and like we felt like we crushed it, but we lost. And then, but it really kind of set us up with thinking about like if we wanted to do this, how would we go about doing this? So our best outlet was like we reached out to the mental health advocates in Chicago called Hope for the Day. And they are a proactive suicide prevention non-for-profit. So like that's cool, but that's not exactly what we're trying to do, because we're trying to talk about substance abuse, addiction, societal pressures, like all that stuff, you know, that we see in our industry all the time. So we aligned with them because, to be honest, it was like, well, they have all the resources, so like if they already have the lawyers, they already have the 501c3, like how can we kind of divide and conquer here? So we started support staff, and once again, like, we're not mental health professionals, we're just like a bunch of bartenders and cooks, but this means a lot to us. So we were like, okay, how do we do this? And so we've gotten a lot of guidance from Hope for the Day, luckily, and they've helped us out a lot. But we started, because I mean, we haven't done everything right, and we've made some mistakes along the way, but like, we learn from those mistakes, and I think what we're trying to do is impact our community by first talking about it, just talking about mental health in general and breaking down that stigma and becoming like advocates in our community, which is challenging in itself, because once you kind of put yourself on that platform of an advocate, like, people do come to you with everything, and like, I'm literally just a bartender, so I'm just like and I'm here to connect you with resources, so there are people who can help you, and also like, we all recognize that the majority of the people in this industry are uninsured, so we're trying to like team up with a lot of partners to give people industry discounts or sliding scale therapy or peer-to-peer group sessions, or kind of trying to be really creative in what works for people, because like, sometimes going to one-on-one counseling works, but like, personally that doesn't work for me. Like, group settings are better, or going to gym's better for me, or like archery or stuff like that. So what we have been working, because support staff is fairly new, we're about 8 months old, so we're actively working on that, because this is obviously something that people want to know a lot about. This is something that we're talking about. So people just keep asking, how can I help? How can I help? So we devised this survey that anyone can take, and that's the whole point, is because our community and like everyone in this room, we kind of all still run in the same circle, the same like 10%. So the point of this survey is anyone, anywhere can fill this survey out, regardless of who you are, what you do, where you live. And we're gonna take that survey and we're gonna generate data, and you're gonna, if you take this survey, you're gonna help us tailor our programming. What are you looking for? What do you need? How can we help you, sort of thing? Because obviously, like, we think we know, but we don't know. So that's currently like what we're doing. So we're just trying to like impact our community by just being like the loudmouth in the back of the room. Like, hold on, let's talk about this. But not only like, let's talk about this, but let's talk about it like with your employers. Let's talk about like the things that you are doing to create safe spaces for your employees. Like, kind of don't talk about it, be about it. Like, I see you in this room, but what are you doing? Because it doesn't mean shit if you like sit here and you listen, but then you go back to your bar and you like still make that bar back feel like shit and invisible, and like still let that chef scream at everybody in the kitchen. Like, it is up to us now to be very vocal and to kind of change the stigmas that the generations in front of us have created. And like, if you think about it, we're only 3 generations into like discussing mental health, so we have a lot of work to do, but like, I feel like with baby steps we can get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to run for president?
Kristina Magro for president.
I'm just kidding.
So, yeah, there was a lot there, and something I want to bring up about the programming of support staff that we're really hoping to develop is addressing it from a multi-tiered standpoint, right? So we can have conversations as folks in this room about mental health, and that's awesome, but what we really need as a community is the support of the organizations that we work for, right? I mean, if you were in my burnout seminar this morning, that was a big piece that I was driving home about, like, organizational support is imperative to the health of our industry and the people who are, you know, selling their time to that organization, right? So addressing it not just from a bartender, cook, post hourly level, but also management and ownership, and implementing those so that everyone's speaking the same language, and then there's accountability within that. So, I mean, in this room, if you're at Tails, you're probably a leader of some kind in your community, and you can usher those conversations and create change that way. So, I mean, advocating on a larger, broader social level actually has been shown to improve your mental health, because it also helps you to assert your identity. So I attended this dissertation seminar from this dude who was talking about Asian American invisibility in terms of racism and experiencing racism. Super cool. I'll be honest with you, I learned so much, and I was so upset about things that I had, been complicit to in terms of invisibility, and like I went home and I got drunk, it was like, I was like, I gotta numb this for a minute, but then eventually you address it, right? Anyway, what he said, so what he said was, in order to, on a broader social level and even an interpersonal microaggressive level, to withstand the effects of microaggression, and microaggression, BT dubs, the way he described it, and I love this, is like if your person is like a marble statue, and there's a small, itty bitty little drip of acid, like the itty bittiest one, like you're still there, and it's like, whatever. But if it happens again and again and again and again, it starts to like erode away at your person, right? It starts to, someone described, I read an article that described burnout as the erosion of the soul, which I think is like, oh, but I think the same could be said for experiencing microaggressive behaviors and taking those in and internalizing them. So what he said, he's like, imagine your identity then is an umbrella that is shielding you from that. So all of these social systems that are severely affecting people and their being, and oftentimes a threat to their person, right? The more you can understand and accept and assert your identity, the safer you will be moving through those systems, right? And what was interesting about the Asian American stuff was accepting that there is an issue of invisibility, and empowering people then to understand their culture, understand where they come from, and asserting those identities that way. And that's something within our industry we can do as well, like asserting like we are a talented group of people who are deserving of care, who are deserving of safe spaces, and then advocating to the folks who are, advocating to the folks who are benefiting from our active dehumanization, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever I say anything like that in interviews, the interview doesn't get published. So that's something.
His camera went off just now. Weird glitch.
So to address mental health issues from a social standpoint, also changing the environment, which comes with like a lot of what you're doing with support staff and a lot of folks. And then of course therapy will help in terms of managing larger social situations. But changing the environment is where it really comes in. Like when I was a therapist for kids, it was so frustrating because you get that kid for an hour, right? And their kids are so plastic and so malleable.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's incredible. And to see their growth and experience their growth, but then they go back right into the same environment, and then it's 1 hour a week that I'm with them. So as a therapist, I would also work with mom and dad, with grandma and grandpa. I would go into the schools because it's about their holistic environment, which is why that multi-tiered piece of addressing it from ownership management and an hourly setting is so essential. Interpersonal, disrupt group dynamics, right? Like, I've been saying it all day, but I'm like, burn shit down if you want. Like, if there are group dynamics that are problematic within your organization, ostracism is something that I see a lot within the industry. And ostracism functions as a way for groups to become tighter at the expense of one. So, you have an opening of a new restaurant, and that there's always going to be that one person that no one likes. That is a social phenomenon functioning to actually bring the group closer together. But that is not good for anyone. Like, that is, and especially the person being ostracized. Ostracism is like so damaging. So as leaders in the community who are probably opening bars and restaurants and doing stuff, that's something to be mindful of, that if you want group cohesion, maybe to keep an eye out for that one person that's being ostracized and develop ways within your organization to bring that group cohesion without expensing somebody, right? So disrupt that shit. Enlist social support, so like talking to your friends and family about what you're dealing with, you know, when you're comfortable, so that, again, you have a support system around you. In terms of like talking about caring for ourselves, like self-care, I'm not really a big fan of self-care because we already have a lot to deal with, and then putting the onus on the individual to also care for themselves is kind of like, it becomes more work. I'm a fan of community care. And community care is when you enlist your social support networks to say like, hey, I know you're having a hard time, what can I do for you? The answer might be like, can you clean my house?
Yeah.
Right? So enlisting the people around you to help alleviate those things, and then when you are ready, you can then return those pieces, grocery shopping, but even just like being a listening ear, but also those like more, you know, tangible pieces of like, I can't get to the store to get cat litter. Like, will someone help me, please? So enlisting social support, and again, asserting your identity will help here too. Process interactions. So like when you experience problematic interactions, like let's say with a guest or a manager, like take your time to process that. Give yourself some time instead of just like repressing and internalizing that and having that maybe come out later in an expression of anger or whatever. Excuse me. Shift the in-group. And that comes back to like the example of ostracism too, but I think we're doing a better job of this within our community in terms of being more inclusive. But this comes in the form of like providing mentorship and guidance and pieces like that. That will definitely help increase someone's quality of mental health and therapy. Therapy is going to always be. Spoiler alert, therapy's in all of these. So biological, you can provide medication and medical treatment and therapy. And experiential, and again, enlisting social support, taking process and time, and therapy. And you know, with the experiential thing, a lot of times, you know, especially when we talk about the grief and loss pieces, that is just really time and processing and caring for yourself and being gentle with yourself. There's some processes that you really can't. You good? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Just tickle in my throat. Tickle in my throat. There are processes that you can't rush. I would like to hear from you about whatever you're comfortable in terms of sharing, like what you experienced and how you sort of built your life out of that as well.
Okay. Well, I was working in Chicago in December of 2015, and I lost my job. I was late and got fired. I'm usually not late anymore, but I was late and I lost my job, and I couldn't get another job. It was Christmas time in Chicago, kind of like summertime in New Orleans, where nobody's hiring. And instead of getting depressed, I got really hopeful. I was like, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna do this. And I applied to like 100 jobs, couldn't figure it out. And something else took over, and it was kind of like this manic optimism. And it almost overtook my life. And at the same time, I was writing a sketch comedy show, and it was Christmas time, and I was like, I'm gonna figure this out, but I was broke. I mean, I was dead broke and walking the streets looking for change, like on the street. I mean, it was really bad. And
so you were experiencing a manic episode, walking the streets looking for change.
Walking the streets looking for change, and then I started to become really manic, and then in February. Can I pause you there really quick and maybe take a second to describe what mania So mania is, for me, I'll describe it for me because I don't have the exact definition, but I didn't know what it was. The funny thing is I was diagnosed 2 years prior, and I had no idea what I thought it meant that you could fly off the handle at any point when you were diagnosed with bipolar. That is not bipolar. It is, you can have various degrees of periods where you have heightened or depressed states of being, and those could happen. You could have 2 or 3 years where you're a little bit happier, and maybe 6 months where you're a little lower, and then 2 or 3 years where you're a little bit happier. Or it could happen every couple weeks, or it could happen every couple days. It's different with everybody. There's cyclothymia, there's dysthymia. There's a lot of different ways of experiencing it. So mania for me is like everything has a meaning. There's coincidences everywhere. There's like, it's almost like God or this divine energy is guiding your every move, and it feels euphoric. It feels amazing. Like, you're like, I get it now. I get it. Like, and you're like, I just, like, you just think everything is going to be taken care of by this internal, like, knowingness. And so I just trusted it, and it's like this heightened confidence, and I thought I was going to meet Oprah, and I did not meet Oprah, but I did meet a Cambodian woman in the ICU, or not ICU, the psych ward that I thought was Oprah for a moment, and she was not.
So if I can interject really quick, so mania from what, as it presents from someone looking in, usually people aren't, they don't sleep very much.
No.
They find connections to God or the government that they think that there's a more divine structure at play, which you were talking about, having those connections, that more like divine overarching thing. Some people will do things like buy 40,000 eggs or sell their business and buy it is.
I went to the bank and I left $100 in the bank, and I went to the bank and I was like, give me all my money, because I was like, I knew the stock market was going to crash that day. I knew it. I knew it. I just knew it. So I said, give me all my money. I left $100 in just to be safe. Just to be safe, in case I had the automatic payments coming out or whatever, and so there's no overdraft fees. And I went around and I said, God's going to tell me who to give them this money to. So I gave $100 to my cab driver, gave $100 to like that woman at IHOP, and by the end of I went to, it was Red Nose Day at Walgreens, and I just bought like 45 red noses, as many as they had, and it was just like, it's Red Nose Day, you deserve a red nose. So I was a little out of it. And that was only the first time. I ended up in the hospital 3 times in 2 months. And then my dad said, you gotta move back to Ohio, and I was like, no! And then he was like, you don't have any money, and I was like, fine! So I moved back to Ohio, and then I kind of entered a depressive state, because you can't be at a 15 out of 10 for months, and then I ended up spending my nights eating frozen pizza, watching Naked and Afraid with my dad in Amish country, Ohio. Like, I was gonna be like a little low for a while, but there were a couple moments that were like considerably low, where I was like, is life even worth living at this place? Because I mean, I had no foreseeable future, but I had started the candle business during Christmas when I needed gifts for my friends, and then it just kept growing from there, and it was my saving grace, essentially. And I stayed in Ohio for 8 months, worked 2 restaurant jobs that were, I thought my jobs in Chicago were bad, and they were not, because like, nothing's wrong with Hilliard, Ohio, but something might be wrong with Hilliard, Ohio. There's something wrong there. But it's okay. I made it through. It was a humbling experience, and I realized that my medication was important. I don't believe in necessarily self-care or self-whatever, but I do believe in self-advocacy, which is saying, I need this. In order for me to be okay, this is what I need. And in order, and speaking out about your experiences and whatever. So I'm a big self-advocate person, and having people around you that can care for you and saying, I need this from you. And having a good support system is so important. And just so I don't keep talking too long, I moved down to Chicago. I moved down to New Orleans, and in the last 2 years, it's been a whole whirlwind. I worked at a restaurant for the first year I was down here. I bought a house. My business grew substantially. My Drew Brees candles became like the most popular gift for people this last year at Christmas, and like I've gotten interviewed by a whole bunch of news stations, and like every time I think that I'm like, this is crazy. Like 3 years ago, I was on the psych ward, and now like John Legend has a John Legend candle next to his like Emmys and Tonys and whatever, and like whatever cool.
That was a good day.
Yeah, it was a good day. I screamed a little bit, but like things keep happening and in a way that I'm like, I don't imagine. Like even today, it makes me hopeful. Like there's so much about being here, having this conversation, and just the fact that like my story can put me next to you, like years after. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking, like the first day we met.
Okay.
We're not going to go any further, but like just how far mental health conversations have come, how far we have come, I think is just a testament to life being what you make of it. And just because if anybody's struggling with maybe drinking or a mental health issue, or somebody they know is struggling with a mental health issue, it might be perceived as a weakness now, but with the right lens, it can become part of your armor. So don't let it stop you.
God, you make me just like burst into tears. That's a good story. 15 minutes? Okay, cool. Jesus, Mary and Joseph. Okay, so I'm gonna quick go through like how these things are, I'm so proud of you. Go through kind of the same structure really quick and how these things relate directly to the industry. At a social level, we experience racism, sexism, classism, hospitality stigmas. Kind of a little bit of a fight with someone arguing about stigmas around working in hospitality. Do you find that those exist for you? Like,
Yes.
yes, I think so too. God,
Like you're just a bartender?
yeah. Oh, what else do you do? When I went back to school, it was actually quite sad for me because I had an answer of like, "Are you in school? You must be in school. You seem smart. What the fuck does that mean?" Like, whatever. But those, also from. But the point is that that kind of comment implies that I shouldn't be where I am, and that's wrong. But we endure that. Those are those microaggressive pieces too, and also from family. Like, my family, even when I took this job with Winebow, they saw it. Folks in my family saw it as a celebration that I got out of bartending, and I was like, no, that's not it at all. So there are definitely societal stigmas around the work that we do that we internalize in a big way. So that's something to be mindful of as you move through the world. Discrimination based on your gender identity and your sexuality. These things happen. A lot of stuff. All of these things are present within our community and our industry, and I'm really proud to be a part of Tales in terms of the programming that's happening around this to try to address this, but it is a long way to go. And this is a friendly reminder that mental health is everything and everything is mental health, right? In our personal workplace relationships, sometimes they're a little bad. like you have a colleague that you work with behind the bar and you're in close quarters. I don't know, maybe you got drunk and made out like 3 weeks ago, but now like there's a problem in your workplace relationship, right? Or you just don't get along with someone, or someone said something to you that was really hurtful and was never addressed, and you have to work in close quarters with them. and you're reliant on each other for your income. So that gets real, that's a thing, you know, issues with management, you know.
Resentments.
Resentments.
Smaller.
Yeah,
They
and
just
the volume,
fester. Oh.
the volume gets turned up on small things when you're in a tight space, right? Guest interactions, like, oh, God. You know? Because like that plays into those the stigmas that are present and stuff like that. The dehumanization is a big thing that our industry, I think, and I hope this to be the next step in the conversations that we're having, the active dehumanization. Like, people would come into my bar and take photos of the bar because it was like a pretty bar, but I was in it, and I'm like, did you ask? Am I like, I was equivalent to the sconce on the wall. I was a fixture within their experience, not a human being. Supervisory relationships. You know, a lot of people go into management without any actual leadership training, you know, like, so that can, so that can take a toll then on how people are being managed and their well-being within the workplace in that way. And just, you know, I have a lot of thoughts of how to address that, but I don't have any time. And social inclusion and exclusion. I mean, that's something that I think we're all aware of within the bar community, like the Cool Kids Club. But also, I'm going to say that that applies to craft cocktails versus dive bars. A part of our conversation in terms of diversifying, like what Tales is, or the conversations that we're having around these pieces, is also including the bartenders. Like, I mean, I live in Chicago, the Wrigleyville bartenders, right? The bartenders who aren't interested in how Peter Vestinos shocks his mint.
They don't even know who Peter Vestinos is.
You know, so really being a little bit more inclusive in that realm as well. Biological issues, medication when necessary, providing medical monitoring, therapy, family and social support, and then experiential processing time, therapy, family and social support. You know, the experiential, sorry, doesn't matter. The experiential piece, kind of fucked that up. The experiential piece, there's a lot that this industry takes on, right? Like, we're very, like, to your point, Magro, we're very practiced in helping, and we're very practiced in putting other people first. What we're not practiced in is asking for help. You know, so something that you can actually do, like, people ask me all the time, like, what do we do to address mental health issues in the industry? These are, my answer deep down in my gut is just to burn it all down, but something that you can do right now is practice asking for help, right? So little itty bitty things like, hey, can you help me do inventory this night? Hey, can you help me carry this out? Can you help me this? Can you help me this? And then also going to people and saying, like, do you need help? And prompting them to give you something to do instead of being like, no, I got it. Bitch, you don't got it. Like, let me help you. So that then you're already creating a culture of that community care piece, but also it leads to practicing so that people are ready to ask for help when they really need help, right? And then they also can identify throughout all of that, like, I do need help. Oh, I do need help. I do need help, right? So barriers to change within our industry. Mental health, insurance, resources, and education. These things are not readily accessible. Even when when health insurance is provided, often the mental health resources within those insurances are really challenging to navigate. The co-pays are really expensive. I mean, I was in grad school practicing as a therapist, and my health insurance, the copay to see a therapist was too expensive for me. So I couldn't afford, as a therapist, I couldn't afford to go see a therapist. And I was like, that's fucked up. You know, and like a lot of the marketplace ones, unfortunately, are a little bit stingy in terms of what the mental health care looks like within that. And, you know, providers not having open spaces based on the panel that they're, you know, it's a big issue. So it's very reassuring and exciting for me to see support staff and other organizations that are doing the work. I also want to say about the organizations, at the end of the day, I don't want people to forget that it is up to the employer to support you. I would like to get to the point that we don't need nonprofit organizations to care for people just in the workplace. So just be mindful, there is an accountability piece that your employer should be caring for you. That is a thing. And putting the onus off on somebody else, like a nonprofit, in order to do that shouldn't be happening. It is, and we're creating systems to address that, but at the end of the day, it is up to your employer to care for you. Getting myself in trouble all the time. Okay. Groupthink and influence. In terms of subscribing to social norms and behaviors, groupthink and influence have a really big barrier, because when we have these cultural pieces of like, I go out after work and have a drink, I do this, right? You're still benefiting from that somehow. There's something that you're benefiting from going and doing those things, and someone else is also benefiting from you doing those things, right? So like let's look at the bar owner, right? Or like someone in a high-level restaurant group that has 22 restaurants and all of this stuff, but doesn't provide adequate health insurance for their teams. They are benefiting from exploiting you, you know, and want you to go out and drink because it means that you're addressing that issue yourself in that way. Does that make sense? They benefit, yeah, okay. Same, just bring it all down. Exploitation of service industry professionals. Again, someone is benefiting from only paying you minimum wage and putting the burden, if you will, of paying your income on the patron.
Or reward systems where it's just, you get a free bottle for selling this amount, or you get free this if you do that.
Yep.
That's
an absence of alternative cultural systems, right? It's right, what we have right now is just kind of like a one-way road, and there aren't really other options of how to move through the industry rather than kind of what we're subscribing to now. I remember my first day behind the bar as a craft bartender. Oh God, it was really bad. I was really bad. I was not prepared. And my boss at the time, he goes, "Hey Laura, like I got something for you." And we ducked down, and he had the overproof of rum JM, and we took shots of it behind the bar, crouched down. And you know what? I got up again, and I was like, "Cool, I'm on it." Like I loosened up. It helped. So it was evidence for me that drinking behind the bar would make me a better bartender, right? So these things.
It's a direct correlation.
But that becomes a learned behavior, and that was something that I was taught very, very, very early on.